This is the ecological way.
We are so modern.
Huh? No, but that's the most ecological way. I mean,
Yeah, true.
I'm seriously considering not printing cards anymore.
It is. I forgot the cards in my room.
Yeah. No, I have it also.
Dear panelists, dear ambassadors, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here with us, and welcome to the panel on the Mediterranean and beyond, strengthening the bonds. Since we are a bit behind the schedule, I suggest that we immediately start, that we immediately dive into this panel. We have a bit more than 1 hour on the really exciting topic of the Mediterranean, of all the different geopolitical considerations that are happening in this region as well, in the region that has throughout centuries been a crucial crossroads of economic and cultural exchange, but also at the same time the site of really intense geopolitical competition. Against the backdrop of Russia's war against Ukraine, all the way down the African continent, we see divergent interests in domains from food and energy security, infrastructure investments, to military armament. At the same time, cities and communities across the Mediterranean basin are especially vulnerable to climate change with droughts, fires, heat waves, and water shortages. What can the Europeans, the EU, and other international actors do to mitigate the migration crisis and its impact on both African nations and the Mediterranean region as a whole? What role will the EU's new Asylum and Migration Pact have? What are the ways to address the growing impact of climate change? How to achieve the better understanding of the region, but also how to develop closer coordination and cooperation? We will discuss this today with distinguished panelists, diverse panelists, including the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Interior of Croatia, Davor Božinović, Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean, Nasser Kamel, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Bosnia and Herzegovina, Josip Brkić, Global Relations and Cooperation Director, and OECD Sherpa, Andreas Schaal. Then, from the Cairo Center for Conflict Resolution, Peacekeeping and Peacebuilding, Ahmed Abdel-Latif, and from the European Stability Initiative, Gerald Knaus, as well as from the Entrepreneurial Forum for Peace and Development, Belachew, Yihun. Welcome once again, and let us dive into this topic. First of all, with Mr. Božinović, with a broad introduction. It's becoming really increasingly clear that stability in Europe is largely dependent on stability in the Mediterranean region, and also having in mind the geopolitical changes that we also addressed this morning. How do you assess the significance of the developments in the Mediterranean basin? Why and how is this relevant for Croatia? And why and how is this relevant for the European Union?
Yeah. Thank you, Karlo. It's a very comprehensive question. I would like to be more concentrated on the issue which is, of course, under my portfolio as Deputy Prime Minister responsible for the question of migration. And this is a part of answering your question. So when we discussed how the situation in broader Mediterranean basin have on our country or on our region, first thing that come to my mind is the huge flow of migrants who are trying to reach European continent. Of course, this is a result of various factors. It is not the only one. You mentioned these challenges coming from as consequences of climate changes, food shortages, which was additionally deteriorate with Russian aggression against Ukraine, which had and still have a direct impact on export of grain products from both Ukraine but also Russia to the already underdeveloped or one of the most underdeveloped region in the world, which is North Africa, Middle Africa, and also Middle East. So all these factors, food shortages, droughts, shortages of drinking water, and the overall underdevelopment, of course, has a clear consequence on the people's decision to leave their countries of origin, and the first choice is for sure Europe, and Europe is most attractive region in the world because of many factors, not only for migrants. Not forget that in 2022, the most tourist trip in the world actually were in the European Union, just in European Union member states. So I think something like 63% of all tourist trips in the world last year actually happened in Europe. So we could see also these pictures, of course our guests too, when visiting Croatia, including Dubrovnik, that the numbers are higher and higher, I mean numbers of tourists. And this is the nice part of the story. The other part is how to deal with this influx of people, not only coming on the European continent, but also internally displaced. I could remind you that last month, 22nd or 23rd, it's less important, in Morocco, it was a UN and IOM-based organized conference in Morocco devoted to the issue of consequences of climate changes on Africa, and one of their conclusions was the facts that could be we could heard from this conference that just last year it was internally displaced people within the region of the North Africa and the Middle East, and the numbers are, I think, more than 300,000 people. Then you have a World Bank assessment that until 2050 it will be additional 19 million people who will leave their settlements in these two regions, and probably their first choice would be to find some new place for living in the neighborhood, but many of them will continue on these three European routes of accepting or using by migrants to come to our continent. I mean Western European, Central European, and Eastern Mediterranean routes. So we have to address this issue not only on the panels, not only in separate institutions, but also globally, because the facts are here, more or less. These numbers will become reality. They are already a reality. Just Central Mediterranean and Eastern Mediterranean route responsible for more than 75% of all migrants coming to the European soil last year. And we are, of course, there are different approaches to this issue. You could and you should look at them as a humanitarian issue, but also a legal issue. Someone will emphasize the security part of this phenomena, but we are talking about huge numbers. That's the point, and we already seen that it have not only security or economic impact on the situation in Europe, but also political. And this is what we are witnessing these days, and I'm sure, unfortunately, that we will witness this kind of development in years to come.
Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister, for this introductory input. We'll definitely come back to the issue of migrations. But now I would move to the Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean and ask a question on the cooperation in the region. You've been celebrating now these days 15 years of the existence of the Union. So where are we today from your view, and how do you see that it's possible to reinforce the cooperation in the region?
Thank you. Thank you very much for your question. Is the microphone working?
It's working.
Okay. And thank you for being here for the fourth edition, my fourth edition of the Dubrovnik Forum. Thanks to the Croatian government hospitality. It's a great honor for me. Let me start by saying that economic integration has improved in the last 10 years. We did a report with our colleague in the OECD on the state of play of regional integration, and all the indicators have reflected a certain progress. But the reality is that we are punching way below our weight when it comes to the real potential of the region. Most of the trade is intra-European. The trade between the southern Mediterranean region and Europe is a mere 15%. And between the southern Mediterranean region, or within the southern Mediterranean region, is at around 5%. So that is not satisfactory. If we add to that the new challenge we're facing today, be it the energy challenge that Europe and the rest of the world is facing on the backdrop of the war in Ukraine, if we are approaching how to integrate the southern Mediterranean region within the European New Green Deal, if we are trying to handle the issue of migration, as the Minister of Interior was mentioning, all that should call and should entice us to engage much more aggressively in terms of improving regional integration. So many win-win situations are more than obvious. I can give a simple example. Let's talk about renewable, for example. Sun, wind, and of course, this new great potential of green hydrogen. Our studies are pointing out that the southern Mediterranean region is more than capable of producing twice Europe consumption in energy if the right infrastructure is in place. And by infrastructure, I don't mean also the capacity to generate power, but also the interconnection between Europe on one hand and the southern Mediterranean region on the other. We have some embryonic initiative. One of them is the new interconnection between Spain and Morocco, or between Morocco and Spain and beyond to Portugal and the rest of Europe, the one between Egypt and Greece and Egypt and Italy, but that's not enough. Just enhancing regional integration when it comes to the production of renewable energy could, one, answer, partly at least, the challenge Europe is facing to ensure a certain independence when it comes to its energy requirement. Two, be a multiplier of economic growth in the southern Mediterranean region. Three, create enough employment that could be partially an answer or a solution to the issue of migration. The second example, very quickly, is the value chain. I mean, the COVID crisis and the issue with China that Josep Borrell has very eloquently mentioned has moved us, as he said, and I'm quoting him, to move from just in time to just in case. He said that this morning. If you want to go into a just in case scenario, onshoring or proximization or nearshoring, there is so many words that describe the exact same thing, should lead Europe to look to its neighborhoods, with an S, neighborhoods, the eastern and the southern neighborhood, and beyond the southern neighborhood all the way to sub-Saharan Africa, as natural partner in integrating them economically as center of production for industry that are no longer viable to remain or to be established on the European continent, and that in turns could enhance Europe's ability to decrease its dependence on value chain and supply coming from 7,000 miles away, with all the geopolitical risk associated with that, and again be an answer to the issue of the huge gap in economic development between the north of the Mediterranean and the south of the Mediterranean. I can elaborate, of course, more, but I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kamel. Following these comments, Mr. Schaal, on the regional and economic cooperation, but also on in view of all the economic and social challenges in terms of food insecurity, economic diversification, youth and women unemployment, climate change, water stress, but also migration. Could you maybe elaborate on these challenges from the perspective of the OECD's work within the region?
Yes, thanks so much, Karlo, for these questions. Thanks so much for you and the organizers. Fantastic to be back in Dubrovnik. I think answering this question would probably take me to 4 or 5 o'clock this afternoon. So I will focus on 3 main avenues which I think we need to attack immediately. First, I think we need to mitigate the consequences of Russia's war of aggression on the region, on both shores of the site, both sides of the shore. We see, for example, the impact on food security. A country like Egypt relies to 85% of its wheat needs on imports from Russia, from Ukraine. We have been documenting at the OECD these challenges, that the dependency of MENA countries on this kind of on this kind of mono exports make the countries more susceptible to inflationary pressures on essential food items, which in turn worsens food insecurity and social stability. So this is something we believe we need to attack immediately by diversification, by supporting MENA countries in this diversification prospect. The same goes energy dependency. Of course, the rise in oil prices benefits some oil exporting MENA countries, but for the others, oil importing MENA countries, this increases inflationary pressures in countries relying heavily on national budgets. Monetary policy has to tighten, and as a consequence, This is leads to lower state capacity to counter growing social pressures, and this is limiting the potential to grow. So these are things where we think these are all cases where we believe at the OECD we need to stimulate diversification in MENA countries. We need to move away from oil and gas dependency, and here I'm really with my friend and colleague Kamal Nasser from the Union for the Mediterranean. I think the potential of renewables in this respect of green hydrogen, of solar, of wind is something where the region can offer a lot. And can even this can be even a winning topic. So all our European efforts and OECD efforts in partnering with countries and with the Union in that respect is certainly something which is very important. And this leads me to my second avenue. I think the area of climate change is one of the other priorities we need to work together in the region. Our analysis shows if we do not tackle climate change, North Africa alone could see up to 90 billion people becoming internal climate migrants in the next 20 years. And this is a challenge. We always, we always think about how can we deal with the migration flows, but we never really serious about tackling the root causes for migration, and this is something where we can be proactively also dealing with what could come if the climate change dimension gets worse. So in some, again, accompanying the countries in the region in their green transition, we have agreed in our MENA regional program to make this green transition focus a priority. We also have launched a new initiative called the OECD Inclusive Forum on Carbon Mitigation Approaches, which is designed to have a more transparent dialogue, a conversation accompanying countries on economic efficient paths to net zero transition. This is aimed to take stock at the impact of various policies, not only including carbon pricing, but also non-pricing policies such as emission caps, deployment of renewables, industrial decarbonization, on emissions mitigations. And last avenue, and this is something also Kamal mentioned at the beginning, I think the question about infrastructure, regional integration, what can we do to further connect the dots? We made some studies showing that if you look at Southeast Asia, all the countries are connected, boom, 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 with vibrant connections in terms of global regional value chains, in terms of transport connectivity. And what we observe on both sides, both shores, is that we have some improvement over the past couple of years, but we're still far below potential when it comes to dynamic regional integration. So this is something when it comes to investment, competitiveness, infrastructure gaps. I think this is something where we need to collectively advance. So in sum, mitigate the effects of the war on food security, on inflation. Second, tackling climate change by investing in renewables, in new technologies, helping countries there. And third, improving regional integration. So this was my 3-minute speech.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the overview of the work in the region. I think that this point with infrastructure and connectivity is particularly interesting and valid. Let us move now to Mr. Brkić. How does all this discussion look from the perspective of Bosnia and Herzegovina in this context of broader regional but also global developments? But in particular, what would you highlight as the main security challenges for your country but also for Western Balkans?
At the very beginning, I would like to thank the Ministry of Foreign European Affairs of Republic of Croatia to inviting me again for the Dubrovnik Forum, and you in particular, Karlo, inviting me to this panel with the Mediterranean dimension, because a lot of people don't know that Bosnia and Herzegovina is a Mediterranean country. And we are not an island in terms of the being open for all the challenges that you and your introductory, but also other colleagues have mentioned, in their interventions. Bosnia and Herzegovina is the sui generis country, is faced, I would say, with two challenges which are international or domestic galvanized, meaning that all of those that have been mentioned, from the dependence from the energy, raise of the prices, ecological questions, and of course, protection of the environment, going all the way down to our exposure for the illegal migration phenomena, where Bosnia and Herzegovina is a transit country. As I said, we are not island, and we are, they're exposed with our limited availabilities to fight back in order to be more on the part of the solution than on the part of the problem. Solution for this, for the Bosnia and Herzegovina, definitely is in the integration in the European Union, because only jointly and together we could resist on those challenges. One side, and the other side is also the, finding the alternative routes for dependencies in which my country, but the entire region as such, is exposed to. And I'm referring for the 100% dependency on the Russian gas, which was especially elevated after the Russian aggression to Ukraine, and knowing how this is, becoming, we could say, a blackmailing tool for some of the countries. For us, of course, the construction of southern interconnectivity and connectivity in total with the European Union is a way out of this solution. Of this situation. Regional cooperation as such in the Southeast Europe is also one of the key prerequisites in order to try to stop this political instability which is for decades present in Southeast Europe or the Western Balkans. So jointly with the regional approach, we can go once again to the foreign policy goal of all the countries of the region that did not integrate it yet into the European Union, because all of us are no less Europeans. We are just not part of the political Europe in this sense. Other group of the problems or the challenges where Bosnia and Herzegovina is, faced are, domestic grown. Those are the galvanized by basically two approaches or different views of how Bosnia and Herzegovina should look like, and it does have its spillover effect also in the region. Just to recall, 27 years ago, after the conflict in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the Dayton Peace Accord was made with the simple formula of 3 constituent people, other citizens, 2 entities, 1 state. I'm not convinced that this is best or the optimistic formula or whatever, but this is the one on which we have the consensus right now. And any tendencies of secessionism or the unitarism from the other side, basically all the efforts try to touch on the power sharing between the constituent people and the citizen model in Bosnia and Herzegovina is also, putting political instability in my country, which once again is also crossing the borders of my country, and it could be potential security threat. So basically respecting this internal structure as it was agreed before, until we don't find the better way to organize ourselves and to integrate Bosnia and Herzegovina and the entire region towards the European Union, and more effectively on the regional cooperation issue, respecting the territorial integrity of the region as such and the countries, is the way out where we could try to lower down our exposure towards the global, regional, and threats of the individual countries.
Thank you, Mr. Brkić. Let us now move a bit to the southern part of the Mediterranean, in particular to the Mr. Abdel-Latif from the Cairo Center for Conflict Resolution, Peacekeeping and Peace Building. And we would be really honored also to hear your perspective, to hear how do you see that in this world faced with growing security challenges, especially now against the backdrop of the Russian aggression on Ukraine, what do you see as the main security challenges in the wider Mediterranean region?
Thank you very much, and I'd like to start by thanking the Croatian Ministry of Foreign Affairs for the invitation. It's my first time at the Dubrovnik Forum, and very excited and impressed by the quality of the discussions. I'm here particularly because I'm responsible for a forum in Egypt called the Aswan Forum for Sustainable Peace and Development. And this forum was launched by Egypt in 2019 when it chaired the African Union with a view to advance peace, security, and development in Africa and beyond through dialogue and cooperation. So we share a common kind of spirit and objective with the Dubrovnik Forum. And actually the European Union is a partner of that forum. We're engaged with the European countries, but mostly of the northern part of Europe. So we're very delighted to also look at how we can engage with this important part of Europe in these debates around Africa and beyond. And I think it goes to also the topic of the sessions of building bonds in the Mediterranean. It should be also done by societal actors, think tanks, platforms of collaborations like these ones, and not only government-to-government interactions. So looking forward to continue the conversations between these two forums, and hopefully when we have the next Aswan Forum at the end of the year in Egypt. But let me go to then your questions on the security challenges. I was very happy to hear at the opening session this morning by His Excellency the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Croatia, but also High Representative Borrell and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Italy, who mentioned Africa and the importance of paying attention to what happens in Africa and the implications of that for the region. But Africa is very big also. So what I wanted to put a spotlight first is on the Sahel region, because the Sahel region is really going through a very big challenge and crisis situation. The Global Terrorism Index was published a couple of months ago in March, and it showed that 43% of terrorism deaths globally happen in the Sahel. So the Sahel region has the highest number of terrorism deaths in the region. Terrorism deaths increased there in the past 15 years by 2,000%. And really what we are witnessing in the Sahel, bearing in mind also that the Security Council now has ended the mission, the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali, we are really looking at a very volatile security situation with a lot of challenges and with the potential that one or two states in that region might collapse this year and terrorist organization might take control of them. So this is a geopolitical cataclysm in the making that has grave implications for Northern Africa and the Mediterranean. And I would encourage to pay attention, to put a spotlight on this also in the discussions here in the Dubrovnik Forum. And I think what we can do is to look at how to have an integrated approach to the Sahel crisis, not through just security, but through development. This is a focus of ours in the Aswan Forum. I know Croatia also shares this also approach, and there's an agreement on it, but how do we implement it in practice? There's still a lot of scope to do that, which also brings the aspect of climate that has been mentioned. This is a region that will be a huge climate crisis and is facing it. It's aggravating and with a huge implication for migration. So this was my first kind of, I think, security threat that needs to really receive greater attention, including in this part of the world. The second one is a more positive one on security in the Eastern Mediterranean regarding what we have seen on cooperation, actually. I've taken place in several of forums that discuss the state of global affairs, and there's always mentioned the lack of international cooperations, the crisis of multilateralism, but there has been also positive successes, actually, in recent months. In Egypt, we hosted the Climate Change Conference, COP27, last November. Our ambassador here was very involved in that effort, and it was a multilateral success. I mean, despite a very challenging global environment, we managed to reach a global agreement on efforts to combat climate change and to address, for example, loss and damage. And I think moving to that, to energy security, to renewables that have been mentioned, I think energy security, energy transition, climate are very powerful catalysts of cooperation in the Mediterranean, as also it has been mentioned, not sufficiently leveraged. But again, with positive developments in the past year, we can build on. A couple of years ago, Egypt, with a number of countries, established the East Mediterranean Gas Forum, very interesting platform to cooperate on gas exploration and leveraging natural gas as a transition fuel in the energy transition. We see countries that have resolved their border dispute, the maritime border disputes, on the incentive of these gas findings. So the economic aspect has even helped facilitate conflict resolution and improve relations in some cases between countries. So climate change and energy security have a huge still potential to contribute to bringing together the countries of the region and including also on sustainable energy. So I think this is a very rich area to continue to explore and to build on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really, I think that you rightly warned on the sometimes present narrative of oversimplification of things in Africa. But that was the reasoning why you're also here and why Mr. Yihun, for the next question, is also here and the part of this panel. With an attempt to better understand the tremendous change that is happening also in Africa, and to better understand the real concerns and the challenges. So, from your perspective, from the perspective of your center, how does it look, and what can we still do also from the point of view of the European Union, of our mutual cooperation to understand each other better?
Thank you, Mr. Ressler. First of all, allow me to thank the Croatian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It's a very distinct honor and pleasure for me to be part of this August forum. I mean, and also some staff members from the ministry who took an extra effort to assure me that I am here in this forum. So, I mean, and also the theme of this meeting is very timely, navigating the global reshuffle, because the global order is somehow unraveling in a ways we are not capable of understanding. And the status quo that has been going on since Second World War is somehow changing, somehow shifting, and we are not sure where it is shifting to. So in a way, it is a process to understand this global reshuffle. So to come back to your question, what are the distinct concerns and challenges facing Africa, and also how we ensure stability, both in Africa, in the Mediterranean, and in Europe? I will try to address it. It's a little bit broader, but I will try to focus on some specific issues here. This morning and yesterday evening, some important issues were raised in this regard. For example, there were attempts to set the scene of how the global reality is changing and where to put Europe in this contestation for global geopolitics. But also allow me, before answering the question, to set some context here. Whether we like it or not, Africa at the moment is the new frontier for global domination. So there are a number of bilateral and multilateral initiatives. Financial, strategic allures are there. Everybody is there to somehow have some say in African affairs. But also some distinct feature here is that African states are somehow becoming non-committal to traditional principles. They are somehow moving away from these traditional multilateral values. Africa used to be where you find strong commitment towards UN resolutions, UN principles. But that is somehow on the decline recently because of different factors. This is not unique to Africa as well, because the same is happening in Europe and in other parts of the world. For example, repeatedly there was this mention of the impact of the Russia-Ukraine war. But Europe is not united on the way it is tackling the Russia question. And also, we are not sure whether we are talking about Europe or NATO, because the way the Russia-Ukraine war was handled is approached by the two a little bit differently. NATO and the European Union. The way major players in the European Union, for example, Germany, France, are handling the Ukraine-Russia war is slightly different from other frontline states. The political solution, political settlement on the part of Germany, France, is more visible. There is also this deindustrialization and energy dependence that is affecting Europe. There is this tide of nationalism. We have to take into consideration the upcoming US election, and somebody was also mentioning the upcoming NATO summit in Venice. So having the entire world order somehow going a different place, we have to evaluate the way Africans are dealing with Europe and the rest of the world in a little bit differently. So as much as I am concerned, this begs a very key question on whose terms that Africa should engage with the rest of the world, including Europe. Because, I mean, there is an opportunity emerging out of this crisis. Africa is viewing its place in the global order differently. We are witnessing, for example, very strong vocal rebuttals from African leaders and elites. And the question now is that, can these strong rebuttals from African leaders and the African elite can be translated into meaningful action in the future is another point for consideration. And we are witnessing this initiative to de-dollarize and also to join new initiatives like BRICS. So Africa is considering the new global order as an opportunity. It is within this context that we have to view the challenges and concerns facing Africa. These challenges and concerns facing Africa have different imperatives: political, strategic, and policy imperatives. For me, the most existential priority concerning Africa is development and transformation. Unless otherwise, Africa ensures a lasting, sustainable development, then its relationship within the continent and its relationship with the outside forces would be challenged. By transformation, I mean not only a political transformation, but also an economic transformation. So energy security is vital for Africa. Africans are trying different methods to ensure energy security. Another vital point for Africa here is food self-sufficiency, particularly investing in the agriculture sector, production, and also having that fertilizer available. And infrastructure development is another key point for Africa. These issues can be resolved within Africa because Africa has that immense potential. But because of bad governance and other reasons, Africa was lagging behind. So this creates the partnership question. Which partner is important for Africa? I mean, for Africa, it cannot decide either to go with this or that partner unilaterally. Rather, it is strategically very important for the continent to deal with all. Europe and America are important partners, but also Africa is bound to deal with China because the infrastructure support coming from China is vital. But also Gulf actors are invested very much in Africa, Russia and India as well. When compared to these regional and global actors, the presence of Europe in Africa is very much limited. We kid around with our partners in Africa, European partners in Africa, that you are nowhere to be seen because the scene is being dominated by others from the region and abroad. Stability is a key factor. Unfortunately, the stability issue is not only limited to Africa. Europe is also facing this stability challenge in connection with the Russia-Ukraine war. But it is a bedrock of partnership between Africa and Europe. But that partnership has to be complementary, and it has to be cooperative. Unless otherwise, Europe ensures this complementarity in its cooperation with Africa, it would be difficult for the future. Because Europe and Africa have these ties, geographic ties, historic ties, and strategic ties. Europe is very closer to Africa, but others from away, like Russia, like China, are more invested, more active, where Europe was visibly missing. Africa has a very good relationship with Russia. More than 20 countries have this defense military relationship. So you cannot simply disregard Africa's ties with Russia as well. So Africans are looking more internally nowadays. New initiatives like the African Continental Free Trade Agreements is by way of facilitating this intercontinental relationship where Africans produce and trade internally. So recasting the European Union's significance in Africa is a strategic imperative for Europe. Unless otherwise, Europe is going to be a second fiddle in Africa because others are more active. Mr. Moderator, thank you.
Mr. Yihun, thank you very much really for the very insightful comments. I think that it really seems quite accurate, and unfortunately this is something that we hear these days more and more often. I think that we really heard some very insightful, very diverse perspective so far, all of them though highlighting the need for cooperation. But let us now shift our focus or zoom in our focus a bit to the question of migration. Migration that has been highlighted as one of the most pressing issues also in the introductory panel this morning, one of the topics that is also most divisive, most controversial also in the European Parliament in many different segments, in many different plenary debates. But basically, Mr. Knaus, we all understand that one of the main components also of now the envisaged migration pact is definitely this external dimension. So centered around strengthened partnerships with countries of origins, with countries of transit. How do you see that cooperation nowadays? How do you see it from the perspective now of the deal that was made with Turkey, but also with now new deals and new arrangements that we also see?
Thanks a lot, and again also thanks to the organizers for this invitation. And let me try to be very concrete and very practical. In the last 6 months this year, we had around 13,000 people cross from the African continent to Spain. We had around 8,000 people cross the sea from the Middle East to Greece. But we had 65,000 people cross to Italy. This year is on course to be a year in which more than 130,000 people will reach Italy. So there is one major migration route at the moment for irregular migrants arriving from Africa, and that is from Tunisia and from Libya to Italy. And in the last 6 months, we have seen, as part of this extremely dangerous route, more than 1,800, almost 1,900 deaths just in the Mediterranean. That is 10 people dying every day on the way from the African continent towards the European Union. And this too looks set to continue. Faced with this situation of numbers of deaths that are reminiscent of a war and with rising numbers of arrivals, we should also note that many of those who arrive, 40% come from 4 nations this year who arrive in Italy, or indeed in the European Union, with very low recognition rate as refugees. Pakistan, Tunisia, Bangladesh, Egypt, that's almost half the people who've been putting themselves into these boats to get to the European Union. They are unlikely to be recognized as refugees, so their goal is to come to Europe to try to work. What can we do? What can we do to stop these high numbers of deaths? What can we do to reduce irregular arrivals? And what can we do in the short term soon? Compared to 2015, these numbers are small. In 2015, 1 million people crossed in 12 months between Turkey and Greece. At that time, an agreement was reached in March 2016 that reduced that number crossing from Turkey to Greece from 1 million in 12 months to 26,000, 3%, through a declaration reached between Turkey and the European Union. And the number of deaths in the Aegean fell from 1,100 to 81, less than 10%. Migration partnerships can achieve drastic reductions in irregular arrivals and drastic reductions in the number of people who die. But how do they need to be structured to work? Because we've had a lot of migration agreements, readmission agreements, partnerships, which didn't produce much impact. The key is to be able to find partners that are willing and have a national interest, that they want it. Remember, the EU-Turkey statement was proposed by Turkey. The Turkish Prime Minister came to the European Union and said, this is what we put on the table in the Turkish embassy in Brussels on the 8th of March 2016. And there was the EU head of the council at that time, the presidency, Dutch Prime Minister Rutte, and the German Chancellor Merkel. And the Turkish Prime Minister said, here is what we propose to you. We propose to you that from a cut-off date, we take back anyone from the Greek islands who you decide is safe in Turkey. You decide that, according to your law, we take them. This will stop and lead to a drop in the number of people crossing immediately. Because if people think that there is no chance and no point in risking their lives from a cut-off date to get into these boats and pay the smugglers, because there is a promise to take them back, the number getting into the boats will fall. And it did. But Turkey was the country with most refugees in the world. Why did it offer the EU to take refugees back? Because it said, in return, Turkey wanted at least 3 things. Support, financial support for the refugees in the country. It ended up a promise of 6 billion for 4 years. Resettlement of refugees from Turkey. When the flow of refugees to Greece would stop, the European Union committed to take a bigger number of people, a humanitarian resettlement program. And thirdly, mobility for Turkish citizens. A commitment by the EU that if conditions are reached, Turkey finally reaches what it wanted for a long time, visa-free travel for Turkish citizens, which, by the way, all South Americans, except Cuba, Ecuador, and Bolivia, have. Anyone from South America, except from these 3 countries, can travel visa-free to the European Union. No country in Africa, and not Turkey. So there was an interest for the Turkish Prime Minister, and the deal worked. For 4 years, it was successful. If we now think about this movement to Italy, could we do something like this year, this summer? I was just with the German migration commissioner appointed by the government for this week for a day in Vienna. The German government has put in its coalition agreement, we want to reduce irregular migration and offer legal migration. So how does one bring this formula together? We have 2 situations. And again, I'll be very concrete and then I stop. 2 situations we need to face. One is people who reached Italy this year from Tunisia. What can one offer to Tunisia that would stop this arrival? Well, Tunisia has no asylum system, so you can't just simply say we send them back. That wouldn't be legal in EU terms. European courts, European legislation doesn't allow it. But what we could return is, of course, Tunisians who come to Europe after a quick asylum procedure, if we have the ability to decide fast, and Tunisia is ready to take them back and say, from now on, we take back any Tunisian who arrives in Italy fast. And then we focus on decisions, the number of Tunisians getting into boats would stop. I'm convinced of this. For this, countries like Germany that are discussing to increase legal migration into the labor market could offer to Tunisia a contingent of legal migration. Germany has offered this to the Balkan countries. All Western Balkan countries together, every year, 25,000 people can go to Germany to work. Up to 25,000 people every year. The commissioner said that there is this possibility to offer to countries legal contingents for migration. So Tunisians don't need to get into the boats. They can actually apply. and come legally. Everybody would win. How about the non-Tunisians? And no, even worse, how about those who are leaving Libya? Because, of course, in Libya we can't really make agreements because there is no security at all. And worst of all, in eastern Libya, if people leave like this boat left Tobruk, where 600 people drowned a few weeks ago off the coast of Greece, it's controlled basically by General Haftar. It's not controlled even by a government. Now, in this situation, we need a solution with safe third countries. And that, I know, was discussed in the European Parliament, it was discussed in the European Council. We need to be able to say that if people leave from that date, and the European Union rescues them and stops them, and rescues them as fast as possible to save lives. However, there are safe third countries to which they could be taken. So from a cut-off date again. Why the cut-off date? Because you want to achieve an impact with as little, as few returns as possible. If people think it's pointless to go, it will stop. So imagine if we would reach an agreement that says, from the 15th of July, every boat that leaves eastern Libya, Benghazi or Tobruk, the Greek, the Italian, the German, the French, Coast Guard, the Navy will stop the boats, will rescue the migrants, and will take them to a safe third country where asylum claims could be processed. If this is seen as an emergency, the European Council could pass a resolution that lifts the connection criteria, which is now in EU law. So you could actually, the European Commission could propose, but then we still need a safe third country. Do we have one? That becomes the central question for migration control. And as we've seen, this is a question partly of political will. Last week, there was a historic decision by British court, the High Court of Appeal, on an agreement of the British government and Rwanda. And the court looked at this agreement and said, these agreements are in line with the Refugee Convention. You can make such agreements. But at the moment, and it's very important, at the moment, Rwanda didn't have a functioning and credible asylum system. They looked at the record. So they said, for this moment, the United Kingdom cannot take people there until the moment when Rwanda has a functioning asylum system. Then you could actually take people there. It's a safe third country, and asylum could be processed there. Rwanda had prepared everything. They had already looked at the files of 5,000 people. They had already reserved 1,800 hotel rooms. This is supposed to be, people are supposed to be accommodated in hotels. If the European Union would now approach Greece, Italy, and others, would now approach Rwanda and say, listen, we need you to help us stop these deadly boats leaving eastern Libya. Are you prepared to take them back? We save them, we bring them there, and are you then prepared to ensure that they get a credible asylum decision? How can it be done? Well, ask the UNHCR, which is already today processing asylum claims in Rwanda. At this moment, people are being brought from Libya to Rwanda since 2019, 2,000 people. And UNHCR says this is a good thing. So if we want to stop deadly migration from eastern Libya within the next few weeks, EU member states, European Parliament would be asked for an opinion, could in an emergency procedure say to our British friends, let's work together and show how safe third country provisions could work. Now, these kinds of agreements would be in the future much better if they involve offers to African countries of legal migration for their citizens and the kind of legal mobility that Europe is offering to other continents. It is crazy that we have more irregular migration and more deaths between Europe and Africa and less legal possibilities to travel. So the vision we need to have is one where more countries in Africa become safe, where we can stop those who get into these boats and die in large numbers, but where at the same time legal migration for work, for travel, for scholarships is expanded. This is the vision in Berlin, in the coalition agreement. It is hard to implement, but the sooner we do so, the better. And it is a vision that we need of humane control of irregular migration.
It seems quite clear that the current situation is really unsustainable. And my question now is really for the Deputy Prime Minister. Does this seem realistic, this kind of approach of reaching an agreement on the level of the EU member states?
Yes, I will try to be also as concrete as it's possible, but let me to refer to some of previous speakers. I think we are all speak about more or less the same issue from different perspectives. The question is, as a gentleman from OECD emphasized that, and this is true, speaking we, I have a European Union on mind. We have never tackled the root causes of migration, because if we did it, we couldn't we could hardly disagree with what our colleagues from Africa, Mr. Yihun, Kamel, already said. The key word is integration. The key word is integration, and this is something that we have to say clearly and to put this higher or at the top of the agenda of the whole European institutions. I also listened carefully Mr. Borrell this morning, and I agree that, and I'm glad to hear that he emphasized Africa, but it should not be to mention Africa from time to time. Africa should be in focus of whole or overall European foreign policy or external action service that should be represent a coherent approach among the different directorates general in Europe, in the European institutions dealing with Africa. But if you have, for example, energy department or trade department or home affairs department within the European institutions act separately without clear goal, what do we want to achieve, you couldn't count that you will be closer to solution. What I would like to say, I have spent more than 6 years, and I attended all Justice and Home Affairs Council in the last 6.5 years. And we spent a number of hours discussing specific issues of migration. And I'm not sure that we are, of course, the fora that should have, or at least it is impossible to approach from broader perspective. But if we are dealing only with migration, and you ask me what I think about this concrete action, it could work, but we are not closer to solve the problem. We have a problem to integrate Western Balkans. And we have Africa, which is our first neighbor. And it is already said that other players like China, like Russia, like India, all of them are more investing in Africa than we as a Europe, as a European Union. And we depended on what is going on and what would be the future of Africa continent, because not of only geographical closeness, but of our historical ties. We have to act in common. We have to approach we need to have a strategic approach to Africa. These measures, like these boats, this is ad hoc, it is important, and maybe it is the only feasible at the moment. But without strategy, what is, let's put it in other way, what is major or higher interest of China to invest in Africa than European interest? I couldn't see it. Or Russia, or India, or Persia. Okay, Persian countries are a part of the same continent. But we are not clarified to ourselves, and it will probably take time. We want to speak, but there is, Mr. Yihun told there is differences. Okay, there are different approaches among the EU member states in all areas. But from other point of view, this is our strength. But we could, I am sure, accelerate some processes. But the real test is Western Balkans. If we are not investing and having all of them, we will continue to travel all over the region and discuss there and spend hours how many representatives of in northern Kosovo would be, which institutions. Okay, this is all important, but if we are, again, and send a clear message, and there is no other way than to have all of them as a part of European integration in all possible fields, even membership. Why not? Why we are so not keen to mention this clearly? We couldn't see, and we will not see a major breakthrough towards the other parts of the world. This is a question which kind of role European Union will be ready to play in global and other international affairs. So far, it seemed that we are closed within the national frontiers, especially the big European countries, which are big only in terms of European continent. Comparing with some other parts of the world, they are so small. We have also demographic problem. We could find solution with Africa, how to decrease this problem, how to integrate these people. Otherwise, we will have a crisis situation of all possible means, from food shortages, from drink shortages, from pandemics, from migration, from boats, from I don't know what. And this is clearly what is happening to the players who are, if I could say, acting without a clear goal and clear policy. Of course, at the moment, the first issue for European External Action Service is Ukraine. But Africa is something that European External Action Service should be much more involved to coordinate different departments within the European institutions. I haven't been in position to participate and to speak about migration out of the close meetings of ministers of interior. And we will not solve the issue, each of those issues, these issues, if we continue to work in this way.
I think that really everyone in this room actually agrees with this main argument of yours, that this is definitely not one-dimensional issue, that this is definitely something that's strategic. And my impression is really that from the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs, actually the reasoning behind this broad panel discussion on Mediterranean as such is actually to try to enhance that kind of broader strategic discussion. So I see that we are running quite short on time, so I would really ask you to be very concise in your final thoughts, to try to do exactly that, to try to have a final input of yours of maybe a minute or so, to try to highlight what you already said, but also what you see as the most pressing issues, or even better, not only to focus on diagnosis, but on the possible solutions and how to deal with our region, how to deal with the Mediterranean basis, and how to ensure that this region is as stable as possible. I would propose to start with Mr. Brkić now.
When it comes to the solution for the what are the challenges for the region, I'm very much convinced that this is the integration into the European Union. Imperfect as it is, European Union with all the pitfalls, for us is by far the better, end goal than the situation which we are living right now. Not only that this was, 2-decade-old promise from the Thessaloniki summit, but once again, and I agree with Minister Božinović that if the EU fails in the kindergarten of Europe, then the question is put about the global reach out. A part of the same Mare Nostrum, we have to extend hand and of course take our part of responsibility to develop the or further develop southern countries, southern neighbors, in particular with some of the freedoms that colleagues was mentioning, and basically that would be our joint response for the better surrounding in the Mediterranean basin as such.
Thank you. Mr. Schaal, the final thoughts from the OECD perspective.
Just maybe reiterating what I said before. Hashtag number one, we need to attack the root causes of migration. We need to come with better regional integration, strengthen competitiveness of the countries in the region. Invest in technologies in the region, bring the countries, help support countries on the southern side to be up to speed, also to offer the necessary jobs, the necessary vibrant economic dynamics we need. Second avenue, I think the issue about tackling climate change is an issue where we can kill two birds with one stone. One, the desperate need to improve climate perspective for the whole region, and second, also avoid climate migration. Third, use this also as an industrial dynamic, invest in solar, in hydrogen, in wind, which is there in the region. So this is a winning thing, and we strongly encourage all our members, our policy makers in the European Union to see this energy partnership with the region as a strategic objectives. And last but not least, I think let's say the consequences of the war-related issues, such as food security, inflationary pressure, is something we also need to all work together, and things like the Black Sea Grain Initiative to be continued and stuff like that are important elements in this respect. Thank you.
Mr. Yihun.
Yeah, I mean, the central question here is that where is Africa in the global geostrategic alignment in the next few years, decades? Repositioning the engagement of Europe and the entire world accordingly is a key factor. Africans are trying to find their place in these new emerging dynamics. And also Africa has this huge potential whenever we are talking about energy security, food security, and infrastructure development. In addition to the Far East, the Middle East, Africa, Latin America, Africa is emerging a key player, a key actor. So having Europe standing in Africa on its foot is essential. But this requires a very strategic approach. The way we perceive the European approach to Africa, to be frank in this regard, is that Europe is trying to deal with the symptoms, not the disease. Migration, climate change, and other pertinent issues are more or less symptoms. What is the root cause that generates this migration crisis, climate change, lack of good governance, lack of humanitarian development, etc., has to be addressed. That is why I also again underline the issue of the existential priority for Africa. That is ensuring development and economic transformation. If Europe invests and helps Africa in that regard, in ensuring development and transformation, then Europe can compete with the likes of China and other actors.
Mr. Abdel-Latif, final takeaway message from your side.
Thank you. I want to pick up on something His Excellency the Deputy Prime Minister mentioned on the issue of integrated approaches in Europe, but I think it's beyond Europe. It's at the international level, at this level of the global governance. I mean, we talk about the polycrisis, the interconnected challenges, and then we need holistic responses and inclusive and comprehensive responses. But that to happen, it needs to move through concrete initiatives and frameworks to break the silos. And I give the example, we're a peace and security institution, but we work more and more on development and on climate. We were involved in COP27, and with the COP27 presidency, we launched the first ever initiative at the COP in climate change on climate and peace, to bring the actors of these two issues together. How can we help address the challenges and the impacts of climate change on peace? Same thing a bit on the second issue on the root causes. I mean, you rightly mentioned on development, and Africa is critical, but if we don't tackle the peace and security dimensions also, we will not have the development that we aspire to. So we need also to work in Africa on this nexus between peace, security, and development to tackle the root causes. If I also could mention just one last point that has not been mentioned a lot, is youth. I mean, the Mediterranean and this part of and our part of the world is majority of the population is very young population, has huge potential both for positive transformation to be harnessed in terms not only of, I think, economic opportunities, but also social opportunities, entrepreneurial opportunities, and to play and to be seen as positive actors of change. I think that can have also a very powerful impact on the stability and efforts to achieve peace and prosperity in this part of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Knaus.
Well, since we are here in Croatia, perhaps it is useful to remind us that Europeans have created something that has worked extremely well, that Croatia has just benefited from, which is Schengen, which is basically fundamentally an idea that you can have more mobility and more security at the same time through cooperation. I mean, European borders have become invisible, but people have not become more insecure. I mean, this is one of the great miracles that's possible. Europe has also, and this has been crucial in the Ukraine crisis, offered its neighbors, and with my colleagues, we were advocating for this for 15, 20 years, visa-free travel, again, in return for reforms. In 2013, we traveled with Giuliano Amato, the former Interior Minister of Italy, Otto Schily and Charles Clark to Ankara, arguing for a visa dialogue, a visa liberalization process, a visa liberalization roadmap with Turkey. Because we were convinced that if there is this cooperation on return, on stopping irregular migration, judicial cooperation, but people can move freely, everyone benefits. Now, 50 years ago, it seemed crazy and impossible that we would have a continent where borders are largely invisible. And what the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister said, I would take further to the Balkans. I mean, I think Croatia is the best placed country now, having just gone through the Schengen accession process, to argue, why don't we offer all the Western Balkan countries a roadmap to join Schengen soon? Because once Bulgaria and Romania will be in Schengen, no migrant will go through the Western Balkans. There will be no borders between Greece and Germany because they can all go around. So why don't we now already start working on the reforms in Bosnia and Serbia with a roadmap to join Schengen? And for the African neighbors, why don't we think and start, again, to be concrete, it's always useful to start small, but breakthroughs can then spread, to think, is there something that we could offer to Morocco or Tunisia or other countries in North Africa, that their citizens can travel much more easily, legally, in return for them helping us control the deadly irregular migration? You know, these agreements are not transactional. They are based on a conviction of values, that mobility is a good thing if it is controlled, and irregular migration is deadly, and there's a moral imperative to try to reduce it.
Thank you. Mr. Kamel, as Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean, I think that you are probably in the best position to provide us with the conclusions before I give the floor also to Mr. Božinović.
Difficult to be the last one to speak, especially many of the things said I agree totally with. So let's just go through a few bullet points. Well, on migration, I agree with those who are talking about the root causes and the reason and the need to deal with the root causes. I'm not a big fan of bespoke agreement on migration management, because they have also the potential of leading to what I call the weaponization of migration, where migration, opening the door, could be a way of getting more, and closing the door would be also a way of getting more. So we need to tackle the issue on a comprehensive with a comprehensive regional approach, not country by country. That's my personal opinion. That's not the UFM opinion. Because what about the case of Morocco or Egypt, who are controlling migration and have become transit country, who are doing a very good job not letting their country become a platform for crossing to Europe? Should they open the door so they can get an agreement against certain advantages in terms of visa, in terms of finance, in terms of others? We need a comprehensive approach, dealing with the root causes first, and then maybe what I call an intelligent, as you rightly said so, an intelligent mobility scheme. On the issue of the root causes, regional integration is the answer. And without being vulgar, in economy size matters. Europe, to be a relevant player in tomorrow's world, in view of its demographic mismatch with its neighborhood and on the international arena, needs to integrate more aggressively with its neighborhood. First, to deal with the migration challenge. Two, to allow itself to be economically viable and to stand to the China of tomorrow, the India of tomorrow, and the North America, Mexico of tomorrow. So regional integration is a win-win solution for the Southern Mediterranean and Sub-Saharan Africa and Europe at the same time. Climate change is also a win-win formula. Why? Because if we engage together in mitigation and adaptation and deploy the necessary investment within our regional context, including in Africa, that will create tremendous economic opportunities. This is a new frontier where technology, employments, productivity, new ways of production, industries would be born on the backdrop of zero or carbon neutrality. So we could use climate action, not to say climate change, as an enhancer of regional integration and as an accelerator of economic development across the wider region, which is Europe at large, not the EU, the MENA region, and sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you very much.
Mr. Božinović, please, your final conclusions.
Yeah, not so close to conclusions, but at least myself. But I would like to say once again, we need to speed up European approach to the wider MENA region, because it is our first neighborhood. But as the beginning, we have to solve what Josip said, our issues in kitchen garden. I'm in the Western Balkans. I agree completely what Mr. Knaus said about what should we be as a newest member of Schengen area, and about our policies towards the Western Balkans. But you know, we are still in position that we haven't received Bulgaria and Romania, which are in 11 years in a row waiting for this. It means that we have an approach, you have to fulfill criteria, and I think the many who is in position to create politics from the European level underestimate that we have to be clear what is our goal. And our goal is exactly what you said. But if we have only communication, we need from you this and from that, not clearly understand that it is our interest. We will continue to lag behind some other actors in the world in all these areas, and with continuing in that way, the result will be more and more manipulation, radicalization of the situation within the European Union, which are already taking place in many European countries, and we see that the recent elections, unfortunately, I could also assume the future European elections will be dealing with the question of migration in a way that who will be more radical, more attacking this process will be probably in better position, or we will really start to think in a strategic way and to be frank with our public, with our people, to say the facts, what is going on, what is the solution, why do there is need to be more active in our first neighborhood, from Western Balkan countries, from Bulgaria and Romania regarding Schengen area, and also for more and more horizontal, whatever, integrations with the African and continent and the Middle East. Otherwise, we will lose this global game. Thank you.
With this, we conclude this panel. I just want to thank you once again, dear panelists, for a really insightful discussion, to you, dear audience, for your interest.